Hello, everyone. I see that people are still trickling on right now, so we're going to give it 1 minute and then we'll get going with the session. We'll get going. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the WorkTango webinar session, How to Lead in the Infinite Game. Before we begin, I just have a few housekeeping items to go over. The webinar recording and the slides will be posted on our website in about 3 business days or so. I'll send everyone an email when they're ready. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask them in the Q&A section on your screen. And if there are any issues at all, use the chat section to let us know and I'll be happy to help. Also, as it relates to questions, make sure you keep your questions in the Q&A section and not in the chat because we may lose track of them in there. And with that said, I'll start by introducing our host, Rob Catalano. Rob is passionate about helping companies succeed by leveraging technology to make employees successful. With his unique experience in HR technology as a founding employee at Achievers, Rob co-founded WorkTango, software that helps give employees a voice and leaders actionable insight. He has recently been named as a 2018 top global employee engagement influencer, has had the privilege of speaking in over 30 cities over the past 3 years, and loves the opportunity to connect with passionate HR leaders across the globe. Hey, Rob.
How's it going, Stephen?
I'm pretty good. Welcome. Now for our special guest, Stephen Chidleski. I was really fortunate. I saw Stephen speak at a recent Innovate Work event, and I just had to have him join us for a session. Stephen engages with people in meaningful ways so that we connect with depth and live in a more fulfilled world. With a knack for sharing the right words at the right moment, he delivers evidence-based content in a provocative and humorous way. Stephen joined Simon's team in 2012, and as an igniter, he is helping share ideas to ignite positive change in organizations. He also leads the brand experience team to ensure the team's culture, products, and communication authentically reflects the organization's deeply held beliefs. Thanks for joining us today, Stephen.
Thank you, Stephen. That's a very kind introduction.
You're very welcome. Well, over to you, gentlemen.
Awesome. So first off, you could both make it a little easier on me without having the same name, Stephen. In planning for this call, we had to have nicknames and code names for the both of you so I wouldn't mess it up in our discussion. So, thanks for making it challenging. But I'm glad for everyone that's joined so far. Already a couple hundred folks on here, and really excited to dig a little deeper into a conversation through Stephen and a lot of things that are coming up in Simon's new book and this concept of the infinite game. And Stephen, I'm very interested in, people's backgrounds and I love the bio that was there, but anything else about yourself, what you do for fun, like something unique about you that we wouldn't know just by reading your LinkedIn profile?
Fun? What's fun? I used to teach water skiing and barefooting at a summer camp, and I loved that. I haven't been on the water in a while, but now it's summer tomorrow, and my sister is actually heading up to the camp that I grew up in as a camp doctor. So I'm thinking about water skiing and barefooting these days.
Did you say barefooting?
Barefooting.
I have no concept of what that even is.
If you Google it, it's pretty cool, but you essentially ski on the water with nothing but your bare feet.
Gotcha. I can't swim, so that's probably why I haven't done any of those wonderful water sports you're referencing. So I appreciate again being here. Really excited to have this conversation. And one more question, before we get into the infinite game itself, I just see the word game there, and I'm interested. Any games that you like playing that you're really good at? Alternatively, any games that you don't like? Maybe you just don't like it, or you're just not very good at it. I just want to hear more about the Steven game world.
Yes, I love baseball. Played it when I was young. Still play it now. I loved Monopoly when I was a kid, and though Monopoly feels like it never ends, it actually is a finite game. And games I don't like, I'm a straight shooter. I couldn't play poker for money because my poker face ain't that good. And games I don't like are ones where people play with manipulation or hidden agendas. So whether that's in business or personal relationships, I just don't have much time for those games. And they hurt me, and I don't like to play them.
Great answer.
Yeah.
All right. So, today is a little bit different than the webinars people have been on. The idea is to have a little more of a conversation and a discussion. There were some folks that were asked, they had the ability to ask some questions to dig into the concept and the new book and the infinite game. But as we go through the conversation today in that Q&A section, definitely ask your own questions. My role here is to dig into some of the concepts, ask some questions that I have, but obviously leverage, any of the thoughts or questions coming from the rest of the group that's here. So please take advantage of it. And this will be more of a conversation. But to kind of kick us off, I'll let Steven really just give us the concept, right? What is the infinite game? What does it look and feel like? And then it'll give us all some insight and ammo to really dive into the right discussion and conversation.
Awesome. Thanks, Rob. So for those of you on this call who are familiar with Simon Sinek, this is Simon's third thinky book. He had two others that just came before this one. But his first book, Start With Why, made a case for purpose. And it was born out of his own loss of passion. He knew what he did. He knew how he did it different than his peers. He just didn't know why he was doing it, and absent of why he burnt out. And he really created a case 10 years ago with the book Start With Why for purpose. Then Simon's popularity began to rise. And if anyone has ever received a promotion, you know that all of a sudden your jokes are funnier, but you didn't get any funnier. And so he wrote Leaders Eat Last because he really needed to know who to trust. Because there were some people who, as Simon's popularity and fame sort of increased, there were people who presented as friends but actually were playing him. And so he wrote this book on trust, which has less to do with people and more to do with the environments that we're in. Put a good person in a bad environment and they're capable of doing bad things. Put a person with whom society has deemed unfit and put them in a good environment, they're capable of doing remarkable things. So Leaders Eat Last was born. The Infinite Game, which will come out this fall on October 15th, really asks this question: how do you win a game that has no end? And it explores how can we be idealists in a world that is real, in a realist's world, in a world that there are tons of pressures internally and externally to our organizations that are making us focus on the short term, even though it's in the interest of our organizations to be around for more than just a quarter or a fiscal year. And so Simon took the work of a theologian, a guy named James Carsey, who wrote a book in the 80s called Finite and Infinite Games, and added on to it and related it to many of the games that we have in our lives and careers. And as it turns out, a lot of us are unwittingly playing in these things called infinite games. So according to game theory, there are two types of games. There are finite games and there are infinite games. So in finite games, we have known players, agreed upon rules that are fixed, and an objective, which is to win the game. There are clear winners and losers. There's a clear beginning, middle, and end, right? Raptors won game 7. There's no game 8 that would break the balance of the game. Thank the Lord there's no game 8. Though they won in 6, right? So that's finite games. Known players, agreed upon rules, and there are winners and losers.
And like Monopoly, there never seems like there's an end, but there is one.
Absolutely.
Never got there.
Absolutely. And in infinite games, there are known and unknown players. The rules can change. You can make up your own. And there is an objective, but it's not to win or lose. It's to stay in the game. There are no winners or losers in infinite games. There's only ahead and behind. So I'll give a little quick example of this. Simon, a number of years ago, about 8 or 9 years ago, spoke at the Microsoft Education Summit. And a few weeks later, he spoke at the Apple Education Summit. And this was in the days when Steve Ballmer was leading Microsoft and Steve Jobs was leading Apple. And we're actually, as an organization, we're not critical of companies, we're critical of leaders. So at the Microsoft Education Summit, about 70 to 80% of the presenters spoke about how to beat Apple. And at the Apple Education Summit, 100% of the executives of the presenters spent 100% of their presentations talking about how to better help teachers teach and how to better help students learn. One was obsessed with beating their competition, and the other was obsessed with advancing their cause. And we know in infinite games, there are known and unknown players. So this notion of beating your competition is actually frivolous because the one that's going to disrupt your business doesn't exist yet. Just ask Blockbuster. And so in order to lead in infinite games, Simon has put forth an answer that there are 5 different practice areas, 5 things we need to do to play and lead in the infinite game. And some examples of infinite games, absolutely business. Just because we have a fiscal year, we don't just end business if we have a good fiscal year. We keep going. There is no beginning, middle, and end of business. It's every business that exists today has been preceded by one and will be outlasted by another. It's an infinite game. And though there are many finite games within the infinite game, it's those leaders and organizations that have a mindset that there's ahead and behind are the ones that will run circles around the competition. Government is an infinite game. Life is an infinite game. Marriage is an infinite game. I can't tell you, Rob, that I'm winning marriage. That is a stupid thing to say. I can't say that I'm winning life either. It's based on our own metrics. But if you look at the way most business leaders speak about the game they're in, they're actually playing in the infinite game with a finite mindset, and that leads to problems. Decline of trust, decline of cooperation, decline of innovation, amongst others. But they say beat the competition. They say be number one, be the best, win the quarter, win the fiscal year. They're playing the wrong game. And so if you want to lead in the infinite game, you have to do these 5 things. First is to advance a just cause. You as a leader, you as an organization must stand for something just. You must stand for something so worthwhile, so compelling that people in the team and outside of the team, even external stakeholders, are willing to sacrifice to see that cause be advanced. What you have on your t-shirt, improving work lives, right? If people care about that enough, both those at WorkTango and your clients, they will, and people on the outside like me, I'm not a client, I'm a friend, but I'm like, yes, I believe in that. I'm willing to sacrifice to see that advance. And sacrifice means, I could show up to work early and stay late, even though I'm not getting paid more. I could stay in the job at a lower pay just because I believe in it. I'll go on business trips willingly, even though it's hard, but it's worth it. All the sacrifices are worth it. And so
I was saying it's actually interesting you bring that up. When we first started WorkTango, this was the first concept where we don't want to have a mission because missions end. That was the idea. And how do we have a lifelong passion to improve lives at work? And obviously it's way before the infinite game, but that concept of just cause, as I reflect on what we started many years ago, you're right. That's why people join. That's why they're motivated. Again, whether those are employees or customers or partners. So just to give context to what that actually was our passion statement.
Yes. And missions can still be important. Missions are finite goals or pursuits that will help us see if we're making progress toward the just cause, but we must have a just cause, which is something that we'll never accomplish. It's something that we can always bring to life. So absolutely. Next is building trusting teams. So we need to create environments in which people feel comfortable to raise their hands and say, I'm not qualified to do the job that I have. I need help. I don't know the answer. I'm struggling at home. I'm struggling at work. And know that on the other side of that is not reprimand, but support. Trusting teams are absolutely essential. We say there's a decline in innovation all over the world. There's no decline in innovation. There's a decline in trust, because in order to innovate, we have to experiment. And in order to experiment, we have to fail. And if we're afraid that if we fail, we'll get fired, guess what? No trust, no innovation. So building trusting teams is absolutely essential. If we said that to beat the competition is frivolous, well, what do we do with the other players in the game? And there's a very important role for them, and it's to reveal our weaknesses. So we call it studying worthy rivals. That there are individuals in your organization, outside of your organization. There are other teams and organizations that are in your industry or outside of your industry, and they do things that either make you intensely insecure or things that you admire. And what that points to you is that in the infinite game, we are our own best competition, but we can look at the other players to see how we can improve our play in the game. I'm not a fan of, improve your weaknesses. I'm a fan of be aware of them and then figure out ways to delegate, form partnerships, or if it's essential, improve. But the goal of our competitors is actually to study them as worthy rivals to help us improve and make progress towards our just cause. Preparing for existential flexibility, which can sound more complicated than it is. So existential flexibility means that if you find a better operating model, if you find a better business model that will help you make progress toward your just cause, you will implode your own business to do that. The existential flexibility, like let's look at the two words. Your very existence depends upon you being flexible. This is not just like, shifting the plan because something changed. Like there is a disruptive threat that is coming and you must respond to it. Otherwise, you will cease to exist. This is Kodak, who actually invented digital photography and chose not to pursue it for fear of cannibalizing their own sales. And this is Apple, Steve Jobs, taking a tour of Xerox PARC in 1979, discovering graphic user interface and saying, forget the Lisa, we're doing this. And that was the birth of the Macintosh. But what's great is Jobs had a just cause and Jobs had trusting teams, which was essential to know how to pivot. Jobs' just cause is about giving power to the individual. He found graphic user interface that took previous iterations of a computer, which was very complex, very technical. You needed to know a computer language, to now something where anyone could use it. And he went, yes, that is so much better than anything we've ever thought of. Let's do that, right? To which his executive team, because there was trusting teams, said, Steve, you're an idiot. We've already invested thousands of hours and millions of dollars in the Lisa. We can't abandon it. And he said, if we don't implode our own business, somebody else will do it to us. And they willingly made that choice. And so existential flexibility may happen 0 times in your career, but the role of the leader is to create the condition such that when an X flex needs to happen, you do it. The irony about Kodak is they were founded on an existential flex, but their founder, George Eastman, didn't necessarily leave a legacy in which the leaders that were promoted into those of the C-suite roles were willing to implode their own business, because if they realized they were in the business of helping people capture their life special moments so they last forever, yeah, digital makes sense.
It's crazy how like the Blockbusters, the Rims, even the taxi industry, like how much that has changed in such a short period of time. There's a couple of really interesting slides out there that show here's the companies that were on the Fortune 100 list, 5 years ago versus today. And that's exactly it, right? Like it isn't just the people you're going to beat, it's the people you don't even know about yet. And there are companies out there that sit with an individual on a laptop that are building unbelievable things that are disruptive. And
the funny thing is you look at all of the leaders and companies who are creating innovations. Why isn't the publishing industry, why weren't they the ones to create the Kindle? You know, why isn't Universal and all the music companies the ones to create Spotify? It's because you get attached too heavily to a business model that is making you money now. And there's a blindness to how can we actually be on the offensive to stay relevant forever? Because they're perfectly primed to do it. They just need to make a profound shift in their business model, really hard. But if you are baked in a just cause, you're willing to make pivots because what's on the other side of it is worth it. Mm-hmm. And what's on the other side, if you don't do it, is death. you cease to exist, or you're certainly not as relevant as you could be. And then finally, and then Rob, I'm happy to hop into Q&A and hear from everyone, but all this stuff is really hard to do. You know, this notion of like having a purpose, it seems like every organization has a purpose on their website now, but how many of them are true and how many of them will actually, when it counts, when dollars and people's livelihoods are on the line, how many of them actually do the right thing to live their purpose? CVS, which is Shoppers Drug Mart of the United States of America, for those Canadians and those Americans on this session, CVS made the decision a number of years ago. They realized they're a healthcare. They care about creating more healthy lifestyles for people. And they looked at what they sold, and they sold $1.5 billion of cigarettes a year. And they said, if we really want to live what we preach, we have to stop doing that. And they took cigarettes off the shelves, and they were berated by Wall Street and analysts. How could you? You're giving away your market share. You know what happened to the entire market of cigarettes? It shrunk by 1%. That decision shrunk cigarette sales by 1%, because I think it's like 70% of smokers want to quit, but all of the remedies to help you quit are sold right next to the very thing you're trying to quit. That makes no sense. So as soon as you go to CVS and say, oh, buy a pack, and they go, we don't sell, but you want Nicoderm? And they go, yeah, absolutely, I do. And their stock price went up in time. But you also look at Walgreens and Rite Aid, who also say on their websites that their purpose is to create a more healthy lifestyle for their employees and customers. And they still sell cigarettes. Why? Because it makes them money. And that's not demonstrating the courage to lead. And what happens is your people are less proud to show up and work. And your purpose is simply something you plaster to the wall and don't live. And that is the definition of inauthentic.
Yeah. It's funny, some comments coming up saying you have to be willing to change. I guess what I wanted to do now, so I appreciate kind of the overview there, and maybe we'll get more into the conversation here, is wanted to ask some questions about just holistically about these concepts in the infinite game, and then dive into some of them.
Sure.
And just a reminder for some of the folks on the call, feel free to provide your Q&A in the Q&A section. And I see there's about 4 or 5 there right now. And as we dive through this, I'll be bringing these to the fold. Hopefully we'll get through them all. There's a couple hundred people on this call, so we may not. So apologies if that's not the case. But do want to have more of a conversation discussion. So again, more holistically, and not, before we get into the specifics there, with these concepts, is this something that Simon or the team there is actually working with organizations to kind of, whether it's their culture, their leadership, or making change in the organization with these concepts? Are they seeing impact? Just trying to get a sense of application of these things today.
Sure. I mean, first and foremost, all of Simon and our team's work is semi-autobiographical. Mm-hmm. So Simon has stumbled upon something in his journey that has been worthwhile to him. There's a difference between an article and a book. An article is a good thought. A book is a robust case for something, or a robust rally cry for something. And so this book was born out of Simon's journey of how do I remain an idealist in a world that is forcing me to be a realist. But yeah, we're working with many organizations who, our just cause is actually born from our why. So Simon first popularized the notion of the why and starting with why. And there's a strong connection. Our why comes from our past. Our why is our origin story. Our why is who we are, and who we are is where we come from. Whether it's an organization, it's the origin or the founder's individual why. Mm-hmm. Or if it's for us as individuals, it's those moments in our life that have been super meaningful, and the golden thread connects them all, and that's where our why and our values live. Our just cause is our why projected into the future. Our just cause is, my why is to engage with people in meaningful ways so that we connect with depth and live in a more fulfilled world. My just cause is, if I were to bring that world to life, or that world would be brought to life, what would that world look like? Imagine a world in which the vast majority of people wake up inspired, feel safe when they're at work, and return home fulfilled by the work they do. That's a just cause. It's inspiring, it's forward looking. And so, any organization that knows that not only is it, more meaningful, more fun, but also you will be more successful financially and in all your results if you stand for something bigger than simply P&L. These concepts can help you bring it to life and stick around for as long as you possibly can.
Okay. It's interesting. You talked about these concepts around growing the organization, the P&L, and someone actually asked a question which is really relevant to that and says this context is structured towards leaders. These are organizations that care about those things. But I'd love to know how individual workers or entrepreneurs or people sitting in those organizations, can they apply this strategy to the workflow too? And my goal is to kind of ask these kind of high level questions so that when we do dive into the individual five ideas there, that it's a little more tangible. But is this something that's limited to leaders? Is this for individual contributors? And part of that infinite game focus?
Sure. One, I think it's important to know that are you looking at leaders through the lens of like authority and like more strategic, higher ranking? Like, we're of the belief that leadership is a choice. Leadership is not a rank or a title. Leadership is choosing to show up in service of those around you and in service of a cause bigger than yourself. So I think these concepts are relevant to anyone. Every human being wishes to exist to serve something bigger than themselves. Like, that's just human. That's fulfillment. And so we don't need to all have a Steve Jobsian vision. That's not realistic. If we all did, we'd successfully live in a hippie commune where nothing got done. We need a mix of both infinite-minded leaders and people whose jobs are more finite-based, but they can still believe in that just cause. You look at many organizations, when you look at a C-suite, what every single person on the C-suite does. Chief marketing officer, chief technology officer, chief operating officer, chief financial officer. What the heck does the CEO do? Chief executive officer. It's meaningless. I think it would be better to have them called the chief visionary officer, that you are responsible for articulating the future and helping to inspire people to go toward that future, not because they have to, but because they want to. And too many organizations promote a COO or a CFO into the CEO role, which sometimes can be useful for a period of time, but they lack vision often. And so I think these concepts are absolutely relevant to individual performers or those who aren't in roles of rank or official leadership. But the goal is not to have a vision. The goal is to find one that you believe in and then find ways that you can advance it through your work and through your life's work.
Okay. Yeah, it's funny. Our CEO at WorkTango is Chief Engagement Officer. It's engaging employees through the journey of understanding what the passion is and where the company's going. And I really like the visionary part of it as well. Now, looking at a couple of questions that came in, I thought this was really interesting from Victoria. It was one of the first ones that came, and I'll read it off to you and let me know if you need me to repeat it, Stephen. But it says, I value rules, and I think they're worth it to reduce uncertainty so everyone knows how to play the game, in quotes. And can contribute and promote collaboration. And at times, it seems like the infinite game seems to disregard rules. Is it more about being flexible with them or about what kind of rules to have and how to decide which to implement them? Oh, you're muted, Stephen.
Muted.
There you go.
That's an interesting question. I think I think this is where values can come into play. And Rob, I'd be interested in your perspective on this as well. So it's like, Victor, I'm wondering, it's like, what are the rules that I can play in so that I can succeed in marriage?
I'm not married. I can't help you out there, Stephen.
I'm just throwing it out to everyone. But I think it's this notion where ethics and values come into play, because in the infinite game, you know, you have a taxi company, and then all of a sudden a company that claims to be a communications company totally messes with your business model. And the rules can shift. And so while I think structure is helpful, and while I appreciate the valuing of rules, if you stick to rules that are no longer relevant for the game you're playing, you're going to become irrelevant in that game. And so I think this is where values and beliefs around what's the right thing for us to do because it says something about who we are. I think that's a worthwhile conversation there. So that's a good question. I'm not sure if I answered it completely, but that's my shot. Rob, do you have any other thoughts?
It's interesting. You know, my last organization, we had our corporate values, which are very clear and ingrained in all the behaviors, recognition moments, anything we were doing. But when it came to rules, instead of putting rules in front of people, we put guidelines. And actually our employee kind of, you know, guide or booklet, kind of the rules document actually was on one business card and was one statement, right? So it's, you know, we're going to treat others with respect, our customers, our partners, our fellow employees, and do unto others what, you know, what we do to ourselves. And it was that idea of guidelines and behaviors and values around what we want to do, but not all the rules in terms of how you're going to approach it, because human beings are different. So, you know, again, it's conceptually kind of another idea of what you're saying, but yeah, these are what I call the coffee and beer questions, where I want to sit down with Victoria and be like, let's dive through this, and you know, hopefully we get that opportunity one day. Also interesting, before we dive into some of the other ones, Tim said, what are a few examples outside of the tech world? Like, is there anything that's outside of tech that are living the infinite game?
Oh my God, yeah. Virgin Companies is a great example, with Richard Branson as the founder. And though some of their organizations are in tech, Richard Branson stands as being a splash of red in a mundane world of gray. They go to industries that are in need of a CPR jolt, and revive them. Disney is an amazing example of an organization that plays by the infinite game. They have a just cause, which is to pick us up from the stresses of our day to day and put us into an idyllic environment where we can bring dreams to life. I think Jimmy Fallon does the same thing with his show. If you look at the very first episode, he articulated his just cause, which is very similar to that of Disney, which is, I know your life is hard, and I want to provide you with an hour or 90 minutes every day, if you so choose to engage with it, or on YouTube for 10 minutes, where I get to pluck you out of your stressful life and give you entertainment and ideals and joy. So yeah, there are many organizations outside of tech where they're bringing the infinite game to life.
Okay, great. It's funny, I saw a comment come up here from Tina that said, FYI, I gave myself the founding visionist title. So I really like that.
Cool.
It's interesting. I was going to dive into a question about just cause and my question was, is there an example of a good one? But more importantly, what happens if people don't believe it? Like, do you fire them? Do you convert them? And then I also saw a question here about, are there any examples? How do you inspire people? But then a really interesting comment by Pamela said, if it appears that the owner of the business does not stand for a just cause, is it time to look for other work? So that was kind of three questions in one, but you know, any good examples of just causes? What do you do when people don't believe, or is there anything to do to inspire them? And then if your leadership or the CVO, the chief visionary officer, doesn't have one, should you be looking for happiness elsewhere?
Sure. And let's see if I can answer these all. I think we gave a few good examples. I mean, Apple's another one. It's in tech, but they stand to give the individual power so they can stand up to Big Blue. A good Apple commercial at the end says you're more powerful than you think. A bad one just talks about features and benefits. But you know, first and foremost, if you feel as though your leader does not have a just cause, ask them. Ask them, like, what do we stand for? Where are we moving toward? That stands for something greater than our own self-serving profit. Why do we exist? What's the world we're attempting to advance? And if they don't have one, the question is, can you choose to be the leader you wish you had? Can you make one up? Can you just be bold and say, well, this is why I show up to work, and this is why I do it, and this is the world I'm attempting to advance. You know, Maguire it, like, right? Write a memo, you know, stand up and share what you believe, which is demonstrating the courage to lead. And either people will follow you there or they'll follow you when you leave. But I think, you know, just as we expect empathy from our leaders, I think we need to extend some empathy to our leaders as well. And sometimes just because they don't articulate it doesn't mean they don't have it. And if we ask them, it might provide an opportunity for them to share it. And then the fun is, what can we do to actually bring it to life, not just do it when it's convenient. And if you do stand for a clear, just cause, and you are doing great things to stay consistent with it and bring it to life, if you aren't inspired by it, you're probably not on the right bus. Maybe you're on the right bus, but in the wrong seat.
Yeah.
Or maybe you're both on the wrong bus and in the wrong seat. And so, I think we all deserve to be part of something that we believe in, regardless of our rank or role. I mean, there are some baggage handlers out there who love doing their job because the people around them care about them and they care for them, and they find meaning in the work that they do, helping people have their prized, you know, valuable possessions get safely to where they need to go. We can all relate to that. So I think, you know, if people aren't inspired by it or people don't believe in it, I'm a big believer in positive peer pressure. People will either self-select in or they'll self-select out, and that's okay.
Okay. Great. A couple other questions on Just Cause. We'll try to maybe get to those at the end. I want to make sure that we get through a couple of the other concepts here, but so appreciate that, Stephen, in terms of, you know, some ideas of Just Cause, other ways that, you know, no matter who you are and what type of industry or organization, how you can have that mindset. And I guess you mentioned things about teams as well, and that concept of trusting teams. A question was, there's a lot of discussion today around psychological safety, right? And that concept that came from rework and a lot of the Google popularized items there. And is it the same? Is it different? Any kind of insight on those two concepts side by side?
Yeah. So psychological safety, or a circle of safety, I know it's been described as having relevant candor, which I really like, which is not about sharing everything all the time, always. It's about having relevant candor, about, feeling safe to speak up. So I think a perfect example of this is in Adam Grant's book, Give and Take. He cited a study of different populations of emergency room health hospital environments. And in one subset, there was low psychological safety, and in another subset of emergency hospital rooms, there was high psychological safety. And one of the results of the study was that there were more medical errors reported in the hospital environments where there was higher psychological safety. And the question was, what? There are more medical errors. The key is reported. So in the hospitals in which there is no trusting teams, there is no psychological safety, people will spend inordinate amounts of time and energy hiding mistakes from each other for fear of being fired. And in the hospitals in which there is strong trusting teams or psychological safety, they're interchangeable. People willingly raise their hand to say, I messed that up, let's not do that again. And people will actually argue over responsibility, not credit or ego, to see that patient outcomes are improved. So which hospital do you want to go to? Obviously one in which psychological safety and trusting teams, same, are high.
Okay. So maybe let's shift over to the worthy rival. And it's interesting, right? The concept where, you're never going to win fully, right? Like when you say those words, you kind of sit back and say, you're right. But how would you go about it? Do you identify like one worthy rival we want to go at? Is there's one, should it be many? I guess, and there's some other questions that came in, but I'll kind of start with theirs. How do you identify the worthy rivals that are around you?
Yeah, so you can choose. You choose your worthy rivals. You can choose as many as you like. And they can either be like people you know. So like the guy who was our previous head of product was the complete opposite to me. And on our best day, we were amazing compatriots. And on our worst day, I hated him, right? Because he made me insecure. And his strengths are my weaknesses and vice versa. And if we weren't on the same page, it was messy. And if we were unstoppable. So they can literally be people who either you admire because you're like, oh my God, you're so good at that. how can I get better, or how can I leverage that in some way to help us advance our just cause? Or they make you insecure because their strengths are your weaknesses. They could be other organizations or other teams, and they could be within your industry or outside of your industry. So like a good example is Disney doesn't care about Universal when it comes to theme parks, but Disney will admit that Universal kicked their butt on something. So J.K. Rowling approached Disney to make the Harry Potter attraction, and her vision was a little bit too out there for Disney, and Disney said that's not how we do things. And so she made the theme park with Universal. And if anyone's been there, I've not yet been, but I've heard amazing things. As soon as you walk in to the Harry Potter attraction, you're in it. There is no line. There's no cheese maze line. Whereas up until recently, most Disney experiences is you'd wait in the cheese maze line for 90 minutes, go for the attraction, and then leave. But the Harry Potter land, you're in it. Like, you are in it. I actually think it's called Harry Potter Land. And so Disney will say, yeah, that was amazing. We don't really care about them from a competitive perspective because like we blow them out of the water, but they totally beat us there. Let's do that. Mm-hmm. And then I think sometimes you can look to other players outside of your industry, but there's something that they do that you're like, ooh, that's good. Let's do that. And so you can identify them. It's up to you. If you pick ones that don't make you better, bravo. It's just boosting your own ego. Mm-hmm. But you get to choose, and it can be many individuals, teams, organizations.
And is it something meant to motivate, action in the organization? Is this something to stack rank yourself against? Like, hey, we want to be able to do the things they did as that kind of, we got to that next level. I'm just kind of saying, how do you evaluate this over time, or is the evaluation even needed?
I'm not sure. I mean, the best thing about this stuff is we're learning as we go too. So I think it's more around continuous improvement. I don't think it's a comparison game because they may not be playing to advance the same just cause. Yeah. If you find someone who's attempting to advance the same just cause, that's a great collaborative partner. But I really think it's like running a race. You could run a 500-meter dash, and as soon as the gun goes, you could take a hockey stick and smack the shins of your competitors and win the race, but you still might be slow. Or you could run in the race, study your competition, not try to beat them, but just try to improve. See if you're running in the right race or see if not. But it's shifting from a competitive analysis to what's the game we're attempting to advance, what's our just cause, and how can we use players, whether they're people we know personally, the tactical example of Universal versus Disney, or even ideological. Like, we talk about Jack Welch, the former CEO of GE, as our ideological worthy rival. Like, not us, but yet there are some things he did that are really good. Metrics, valuable, just not shareholders' supremacy. That's not what we believe in.
Okay. It's kind of funny you mentioned continuous improvement, and we have a lot of our WorkTango customers likely on this meeting, and we always get into these philosophical debates around things like benchmarking. So we'll help benchmark the organizational engagement measures or other things to other types of companies in the same geographies or locations or sizes, et cetera, industries. And some are saying, who cares? Like, as long as we're continually improving and focusing on what's going to make us better, then I don't even want to see those metrics. And then there's other parts that are saying we need to see those to validate how well we're doing. So it's always this debate that comes up, and I never really likened it until right now to the worthy rival. And just another frame of mind from my perspective of what I've seen in working with a lot of companies.
Yeah, I still think it's valuable to look at the other players in the game, but to evaluate your success simply based on benchmarking against theirs, can't you hold yourself to a higher standard?
Yeah. Okay. I want to make sure we touch on all of them, but and reference some of the questions here as well. But maybe moving off to the existential flexibility. should people interpret this as being agile? Is it the same? Is it different? Just conceptually, a lot of companies talk about the agility and the agile process, and started in tech, obviously a little more profound in organizations across the board. But the first thing I thought was, is this just an agile process, or is there something else there?
It's bigger than that. So agility is important, but this is more around resilience.
Okay.
This is when, how can you play on the offensive when disruption is coming? How can you ride the tidal wave instead of the tidal wave crushing you? And the thing that we need, remember, it's having a capacity that should you need to make an existential flex move, you can. And the thing you need in order to exercise existential flexibility is a just cause and trusting teams. Mm-hmm. Absent of a just cause, you don't know what's the point of flexing. You need to be deeply rooted in a just cause. So for example, if Blockbuster realized that their very existence was about entertaining people and not about DVDs, they would have made a shift into streaming. But they made 16% of their revenues on late fees. And so they were just happy to play that game. Mm-hmm. So it isn't about agility. It's about the willingness to implode your business should you see an opportunity to go on the offensive that will allow you to be around for the next 100 years. Okay.
And kind of double clicking on that, a comment came in, or a question from Dean that said, asked to talk a little deeper about it, which I think you have, but what does that mean to do it on a daily basis in your personal career and life? Like, we're talking a lot about the Blockbusters and that type of thing, but any kind of personal things that we could take away in terms of how we can impact or be existentially flexible?
Yeah. So I think there's a difference between like being flexible day to day, like being fixed on vision, and flexible in the way that you get there. Mm-hmm. What existential flexibility really is something so profound that you may do it once in your career, or maybe none. And so I think it's the value of reflection. It's the value of continuous learning. It's the value of speaking to people inside and outside of your industry around, what's coming and how can we stay relevant. So I'm a big believer in, strategic planning, knowing that the plan ought to be thrown out the door as soon as you leave the offsite. But the value is about the process of planning and building relationship to each other and the future. So we can work on our capacity every single day such that if we need to make a profound shift, we can. But again, this is Kodak, Netflix stuff. This is not about day-to-day, though the day-to-day is important around being flexible in what we need to do to make progress and in any given day, week, quarter, or year.
Okay. There's a lot of questions. I know with the time we're not going to get to it all, but one more kind of overarching question. Can you play an infinite game with 4 out of 5 of these? Do you need them all? Like, is there anything more important than the other, that this is kind of the top one that you need to focus on?
You need them all, but there are some that come before the others. So okay. I mean, you could identify worthy rivals without having a just cause. It just helps you a lot more to have a just cause. So you need to have just cause and a trusting team in order to have a capacity and to exercise existential flexibility. Because how are you to know what profound shift to make if you aren't rooted in something? The only reason Steve Jobs could take the risk in imploding his business in the late 70s, early 80s is because he found a better way to advance his just cause of giving the power to the individual. If he didn't have that just cause, he'd go, gooey, that's cool. Let's keep on going, doing what our thing, right? And so just cause ought to come first. Trusting teams, it goes in order. And the reason the courage to lead is last, it's because all of this stuff is hard to do. And we need to demonstrate the courage to lead in all of them. But yeah, the existential flexibility is baked within just cause and trusting teams.
Okay. Yeah, there seems to be a lot of the questions and comments around just cause, and a couple that caught my eye here is and I'll throw a couple at you just to make it hard on you,
Sure.
Stephen. But one is, how do you find just cause in kind of an unsexy software company? I think you might have answered it similarly. Can you have more than one just cause? Like is that possible in an organization?
Yeah.
Any thoughts on those?
So you typically have one just cause, but you can have nested just causes. So just as the United States of America has a just cause, that all are created equal and are each endowed to the unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But there have been many smaller just causes within that larger. We have seen gay rights recently. We've seen civil rights. We've seen women's suffrage. So you can have many nested just causes within a larger one.
Okay.
What was the other question on just cause?
Can there be more than one, as well as
how do you find it in an unsexy?
Yeah.
So there's an example of a manufacturing company based out of St. Louis, Missouri, called Barry Waymiller, led by a guy named Bob Chapman. Simon wrote about Barry Waymiller in Leaders Eat Last. They employ 8,000 people worldwide, mostly in the States, but they essentially buy struggling manufacturing companies and revive them, both with their financial tools, but most importantly, with their ability to create truly human cultures. And so I visited a plant in Phillips, Wisconsin. It's that small. And at this plant, as in most of the plants with Barry Waymiller, they make large machines that then go on to make paper products. Like, not sexy. Their machines are responsible for about 95% of North America's toilet paper.
Oh, wow.
As well as corrugated cardboard boxes for beer, right? So, like, not that sexy, but yet when you go visit the plant, the general manager knows what's going on in the people's lives who work on the floor. He knew that someone was losing his 11-year-old golden retriever. The GM himself shared that he had a personal struggle in his life, and he wouldn't have been able to have gone through it if it weren't for his tribe and family at work.
Yeah.
They make unsexy, large paper-producing machines, and they have a profound belief that everyone is someone's son and daughter, and that we have a responsibility to treat them as humans. That's a just cause. That work is something that we should have dignity in and be treated as human beings and not numbers, even at a company with 8,000 people. Duh. And when 2008 recession hit and they lost 40% of their orders in business overnight, they did not let go of a single person. They found inventive ways to keep everyone.
Mm-hmm.
The biggest was a 6-week furlough. So everyone in the organization had to take 6 weeks off without pay. Everyone, regardless of rank and title. And what was neat is naturally people who could afford it less had help from people who could afford it more. People who could afford to take more time off gave their weeks to work for people who couldn't afford to take the time off.
Very cool. Because
it was the way that the CEO and chairman, Bob Chapman, announced it, that it's better we should all suffer a little than any one of us should suffer a lot. And that's based in all the infinite game concepts of just cause and trusting teams, and even existential flexibility of we don't do mass layoffs because those are human beings. That's a heart count, not a head count.
Yeah. And I want to double click on one thing on that, because it's a really good question from Al here. And you talked a bit about the order, like you need all 5, but it just cause is really important. Any guidance on that you can give about identifying or truly defining the just cause? Like, if we all think about doing that as business leaders or leaders of our team or inspiring the other leaders in the organization, any advice or guidance?
It's easier if you've articulated your why. So again, your why is your origin story. Your why comes from your past. And you simply unpack the question of what has made you proud to be in existence, whether that's an individual or an organization. Mm-hmm. We have more information on our website, simonsinek.com, on how to do that. We wrote a book on it called Find Your Why. But your just cause is born from your why. So Simon's why is to inspire people to do the things that inspire them, so that together each of us can change our world for the better. And his just cause, which it took him years to articulate, though he's known it for a while, he's thought of the world that would exist should his why be brought to life. And his just cause is imagine a world in which the vast majority of us wake up inspired, feel safe at work, and return home fulfilled by the work that we do. So inspired, safe, and fulfilled is the world that we're attempting to advance. And when we have a just cause, it's actually easier to measure momentum. We can look at Gallup engagement scores. We can look at productivity. We can look at sick leave and sick days. We can do a WorkTango survey to see, are people feeling inspired, safe, and fulfilled in any given moment. So it's really taking your why, which is who you are and where you come from, and then putting it into the future, as in, if our why were to be realized in the world, what would that world look, feel, smell, taste like? Mm-hmm. It's Martin Luther King, I have a dream, right? I believe in a world in which the rule of man is the same as the rule of law. I believe in a world that is just and equal for all. I believe in a world in which little white kids and little black kids play in the same playground, holding each other's hands. It builds something in our mind's eye that we can see, such that when we're making progress towards it, we go, yes, we're advancing our just cause. But again, so important to know that you'll never actually get there.
Yeah. Okay. So there are 5 minutes left. I'm going to ask other Stephen to give a quick high level of what's going to happen next, where you can find information. But then we want to come back and spend the last 4 or as many minutes as we have to go through some of the other questions here, because there's definitely a lot. So other Stephen, Shin, I'll leave it to you.
Better.
Shin, hey, what a great name. Thanks, guys. All right, we're just going to jump into a couple small things here. I do want to tell everyone about our next webinar session. We're actually moving the frequency of our sessions up to every 3 weeks now, because we've had such a great reception to them. So next one is called Leading and Engaging Millennials and Gen Z, different generations, different approaches to work. And this one's with our friend Giselle Colvari. She's the president and co-founder of NGen People Performance Incorporated. So this one's on July 11th. It's at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. There's the link. I'm going to send everyone the slides anyway, so you'll have this link. Also, if you go to our resource center, it's really easy to find it. Just click on webinars and it'll show, it'll show that this as the most recent webinar. Speaking of the resource center, of course, we have, past and upcoming webinars, but we also have blog posts and articles and videos and a bunch of great how-to guides. So go check it out, worktango.com, and click on resources, and you can find it there. Again, I will be sending out an email in the next 3 business days or so with a link to this recording, some slides, and actually a really great article that Shed there wrote for us that we're going to kind of put into a PDF format for everyone. And with that, let's get back into some questions.
All right, we're back. So a lot of, it's sad I can't get to all the details and all the questions here, apologies. But one that really caught my mind, or caught my eye from Nikki, was, where does competition really come into play, right? If we're not thinking of competition, only think of worthy rivals, the desire of wanting to be better than your competitors, is that important? Where does it have a place in these values?
It's actually not wanting to be better than your competitors. It's wanting to be better than yourself.
So the continuous improvement.
Your main competitor is yourself, and you use the other players to help you improve and get better. Okay. I saw Tina made a question around, what if one of your values is play to win? As long as your leaders know that it's an infinite game, fine, but it's probably better to say play to improve.
Yeah. Actually, I don't know if it was the same Tina or not, but I'm just reading her comments, as my interpretation is that by studying the worthy rivals, is a difference in energy of winning over them and learning from them. It's a shifting of learning mindset, in her opinion. Which,
yeah.
Okay. So the other question that I caught my eye here was, a lot of these other examples, we talked about sexy tech companies, we talked about, other organizations like manufacturing, any public sectors or quasi-public organizations you've seen go through this process, or any other insights on that?
I mean, you look at the difference between the Eastern world and the Western world with politics right now. Mm-hmm. In the Western world, most of our political leaders are focused on winning the next election. In China, political parties talk about their vision for the next 1,000 years. And China, make no mistake of it, will become the biggest world power very soon. And that's the impact of having an infinite mindset versus a finite mindset. And most often, finite mindsets are self-serving. If you look at the vast majority of our political leaders, And they're more so focused on themselves and their approval ratings and their next election cycle rather than the party and the country. So, I mean, that's government. But yeah.
Okay. And maybe just taking that idea, a really good question from Laura. I actually was thinking about this earlier. Is there a difference between a just cause and a vision? Like, are they similar? Are they the same?
It's the same. The only issue is you ask 165 people on this call their definition of a vision, and you probably get about 163 different answers. And so part of Simon's genius is when you have, like it's someone saying, well, isn't why just purpose? And the answer is yes, but the issue is if we use one word and have many different meanings, let's just create a new word so we can all understand. And this is actually the PDF that's coming out that Stephen Shinnon mentioned. It's unpacking what makes a just cause or what makes a cause just. So, everyone has a mission or a vision statement, but which comes first? And most of them are pretty cruddy. To be the best, to be number one, that's not valuable and that's not infinite game-esque. So great just causes are for something. They're not against something. They're inclusive. They are service-oriented. They're resilient and they're idealistic. So was it Laura you said? Encourage her to check that out. But yeah, it's vision. But again, too many people use that word in different ways. So we just created something else called just cause.
One thing the last time I saw you speak that really resonated was your example of not a great just cause. I think it was like an aluminum company. Can you share that with everyone? I remember it every time I think about talking about our vision and passion.
Well, this is part of the reason Simon called it just cause, is because people would come up to him on the street and say, Simon, you've changed my life. I found my why. And he loves hearing a good why statement. So he'd say, what's your why? And they'd say to be the number one aluminum side provider in the greater Phoenix area. Like, you don't get it. So that's Finite.
Cool. I always remember that story.
Yeah.
All right. So it looks like we're about a minute over. Again, I really appreciate people that participate and ask questions. Unfortunately, we didn't get to all of them. We did the best we could, but we did want to cover all the major topics and some holistic ones. Last thing I'll ask, Stephen, is any last thoughts or advice? Any next steps someone could take if they really want to dig into some of these concepts, or just a place to start?
I think the biggest thing is that all of this stuff is really hard to do, and we cannot do it on our own. There's the African proverb that says to go fast, go alone, to go far, go together. And so it's easy to slip up. It's easy to become finite-minded. It's easy to focus on the expedient, especially when there's pressures from people inside and outside of our organizations. Have a leadership buddy. This stuff is imperfect because it's human, and humanity and human beings are imperfect. Yeah, Joe, together is better, 1000%. So to go fast, go alone, to go far, go together. Have some leadership buddies and play the infant game in good company.
Wonderful. Shed, thank you for your time and your insights. I really appreciate it. Thank you everyone for participating and so many questions. I wish we had more time, but I thank you again, and have a good rest of the day, everyone. Take care.